Hi, welcome. It's May 28th, and it's great to be here today. And yesterday, Heather was talking to us and introduced us to Proverbs and this whole idea of wisdom literature that comes from a very wise man, Solomon. And she pointed out the need to desire and to seek wisdom. And of course, what we understand is wisdom is more than knowledge. I don't know about you, but there have been people in my life that I have known, going back all the way to college days, who were knowledgeable, who were what we would call intelligent or smart. However, though they were very knowledgeable, they were not wise. And the wisdom speeches that Solomon give us focuses for us throughout the Proverbs here, two enemies of being wise that are always there to trap us. And in chapters 2, 4, and 6, as we'll notice, there's an importance placed on truth-telling. So first of all, truth-telling is important. That is the way of the wise, and it can be a trap for many of us because we can be deceived and get caught lying if we aren't wise. And the other thing is, besides truth-telling, it's choosing right companions in life. And in fact, that's an even more dominant theme. As I kind of looked at it, it appears in chapter 1 and 2 and 4 and 6 and 7 and 9 over and over again. And I think this idea of choosing right companions fits in today in chapters 5, 6, and 7 because we have this desire for wisdom and to behave wisely. That becomes the goal. And according to Solomon, nothing clouds our judgment more than succumbing to our passions, to our illicit passions in life. And so much of the focus here in these three chapters is on adultery. In chapter 6 for a while, he goes through a whole number of things. It's almost like we have so much to talk about in so little time that you're almost left like feeling like you've been drinking from a fire hose because he goes into one thing after another. But the rest of these three chapters seem to focus on adultery. And I just wanted to point out a couple of things because what it really is teaching us about is the way of the wise is to learn what temptation is all about and to avoid it at every step. In chapters 5, the beginning of the first verses, he addresses the woman involved in adultery. And in chapters 7 to 14, he addresses the men who are involved in adultery. And so it goes through this entire list. And what's interesting, there are 4 things that I found there at the beginning of chapter 5 that really speak to what happens in this process of being tempted and ultimately succumbing to a bad behavior. Well, number 1, we get poisoned. As it speaks about there early on in the chapter. The symbol of wormwood is a symbol of bitterness in the Old Testament, and so it's actually a poison. It may maybe appear or initially taste sweet, but it is nonetheless a poison, and if we allow it in, it will poison our bodies. And the second thing is it speaks about being mutilated by her words, because it says there in verse 4, but in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. So we have this idea that her words are sharp as a two-edged sword. You're going to get cut up by it if you listen and if you are tempted in that temptation. The third thing is it's a path that ultimately leads down to death. And then lastly, it says her ways are unstable. Her paths are crooked, depending on your translation. And so that really means disoriented, intoxicated, unstable, crooked. All of those things would apply here. And that speaks about the feeling that you end up getting into when you succumb to the temptation. You lose the wise way, and you get lost in these behaviors that are not wise at all. And so this idea of let's avoid those unsavory companions or unhealthy companions in our lives because they can tempt us reminded me very quickly and immediately of Jesus' teaching of the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6 and his words, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Jesus taught this as a prayer, and it was to make us aware and watchful so that we aren't ensnared and tempted because it's so easy. And it's especially easy, I think, even as in those days Solomon was speaking against it here. I think it's even easier in our culture today. And I was thinking about why, and specifically, number one, in our culture today, we have cars. We travel a long ways away. You can get out of town to where nobody knows you, and that's the other thing. In big cities, we can be anonymous. We can do what we want, and no one seems to care. The third thing is, when it comes to our bodies and our sexuality, we have mechanical and chemical means to avoid pregnancy now, and therefore, there's no longer that threat held over us. And fourthly, we seem to live in a society where the idea of adultery, unless you're a politician and someone wants to get you, makes not much more than a ripple of public outrage, if at all, in our culture today. And finally, the emotional and physical consequences of living an adulterous lifestyle with someone you're not married to, even if the relationship remains hidden, the consequences are still real. And I think those are things that we need to keep in mind here, and especially in today's society, in our culture today as we live it. The old adage, the water is not sweeter nor the grass greener on the other side of the fence, is very true. The Apostle Paul encouraged us to flee temptation, and that's probably the best advice at all. Rather than think I can withstand it and be around it, if you sense that something is leading you astray, you need to run. Go in the other direction. Don't even let yourself get involved in that so that you don't see it or hear it, and then therefore succumb to the temptation. And finally, what I would leave you with today, actually on a positive note, in verses 15 to 20, in the midst of this whole diatribe about adultery, he does speak very positively about the relationships of husband and wife. And he talks about how important it is to drink water from your own cistern, running from water from your own well. And what God implies here is that the wife or the husband that you originally married, the feelings, the affection, the love that existed, even if you're struggling now, that can be gotten again. But what you have to do is focus on that. You have to embrace it. You have to celebrate what that loving, faithful relationship gives to you. The security, in some respects, the fertility, the children. Part of a wonderful thing about marriage is children that carry on your family's line and who become little ones that you impress the truths and the skills for life upon. These things are the things of life. These are things to celebrate, not drudgeries. And I think sometimes our culture makes those very things to be boring, to be laborious, and to be a challenge. And if there's a way to short-circuit it and pass it off to some other entity, whether it's the schools, the church, or the government, or a ball club, or a community center, or anything else, we're really very willing to do that. And I think we miss out on so much when we let our eyes and our hearts stray from what God gives us originally in our marriage, and look outside across the pasture or across the street to someone else. And so the encouragement here is, I think the bottom line is, learn that wise people tell the truth and they have good companions. And here's one example of what happens when you get caught up in a relationship with unhealthy companions. And we'll hear more about some others as we go on. But nonetheless, let us remain faithful and let us pray that prayer. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And I pray that today, and I pray it for you as well. God's blessings. We'll talk to you again soon.